Have you ever felt powerless against rules that seemed designed to make your life difficult? That's exactly how I felt living under the iron fist of Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. But sometimes, when pushed too far, even the most patient person finds a way to fight back. This is the story of how I quietly turned the tables on an HOA that had forgotten its purpose was to serve the community, not rule it. I never wanted trouble with our HOA. I didn't. But when I found that bright orange notice taped to my front door last Tuesday morning, I knew this was war. My hands were shaking as I read it. Immediate HOA fee increase. $500 monthly. Violation. Excessive vehicles on property. 3 cars. That's what this was about. My work truck that I need for my construction business, my wife's SUV for her hospital shifts, and the used Honda we'd bought for our daughter's 16th birthday last month. 3 perfectly normal cars in our own driveway. I watched through my kitchen window as Patricia Winters, our HOA president, did her morning inspection walk with her little pink clipboard and measuring tape. She stopped at my driveway, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures. Again. This was the 3rd time this week. Honey, she's out there again. My wife Sarah called from the living room. Maybe we should just park the Honda in the garage? No, I said firmly, pouring my coffee. We're not hiding our daughter's car like we're doing something wrong. The garage is full of Sarah's medical supplies and my work equipment. Exactly like we explained at the last HOA meeting. That meeting. I couldn't stop thinking about how Patricia had smirked when I tried to explain our situation. Rules are rules, Mr. Reynolds, she'd said, not even looking up from her phone. Maybe if you can't afford proper garage storage, this neighborhood isn't for you. What Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been quietly buying up properties in our development for the past 5 years through my real estate investment company. Every time a house went up for sale, I made sure to use different LLC names for the purchases. It started as a smart investment strategy, but now it had become something more. I walked outside to get the mail, purposely taking my time. Patricia pretended to inspect Mrs. Johnson's rose bushes while watching me from the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. Johnson had been fined last month for having roses that were too vibrant and disrupting neighborhood color harmony. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Property closing complete. You now own 67% of the development. I smiled, tucking the phone away as Patricia power walked toward me, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Mr. Reynolds, she called out, her voice sickly sweet. I trust you received our notice about the vehicle violation? I did, Patricia, and I have some questions about the legal basis for this fee increase. I kept my voice calm and professional. She waved her hand dismissively. The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd understand how these things work. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Little did she know I'd attended every single meeting for the past 5 years through proxy representatives who owned the other houses. I'd sat back and documented every one of Patricia's selective enforcements, every questionable fee, every abuse of power. As she turned to leave, her designer heels clicking on the sidewalk, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be discussing additional measures about problem properties." I watched her walk away, then pulled out my phone again to text my lawyer. Time to prepare those documents we discussed. Patricia's making her move tonight. My daughter's car pulled into the driveway just then, and I saw Patricia stop to take more photos. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Tonight would change everything in this neighborhood. But first, I had some calls to make. # years in the making. I went inside and spread out the property maps on my desk, each lot carefully highlighted and coded. 5 years of careful planning, of building evidence, of watching Patricia's reign of HOA terror grow worse. Tonight she would learn that her biggest mistake wasn't just targeting my family. It was underestimating exactly who she was dealing with. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from across the street, crying about another violation notice. As I listened to her story, I glanced at the framed photo on my wall. My father standing proud in front of his first house, before an HOA's harassment had forced him to sell at a loss 20 years ago. Dad had taught me to play the long game, to fight smart instead of angry. I looked at my watch. 6 hours until the meeting. Patricia wanted to play hardball over a few cars in a driveway? She had no idea what was coming. The roots of my plan went back much further than Patricia's latest power trip. When I moved into Oak Ridge Estates 8 years ago, I was just looking for a nice place to raise my family. The neighborhood had beautiful mature trees, good schools, and well-maintained common areas. The HOA fees seemed reasonable for the amenities provided. For the first year, everything was fine. Then Patricia Winters was elected HOA president, and the atmosphere changed almost overnight. Suddenly, there were new rules about everything. What colors you could paint your mailbox, how many hours children could play outside, even what kinds of flowers were appropriate for front gardens. At first, I tried working within the system. I attended meetings, raised concerns, and suggested more reasonable approaches. But Patricia had stacked the board with her friends, and my voice might as well have been silent. When I saw elderly neighbors in tears over ridiculous fines and young families moving out because they couldn't keep up with the arbitrary rules, something broke inside me. That's when I remembered what my father had taught me about property investment. Land is the one thing they aren't making any more of, son, he'd say. Own enough of it, and you own the future. So I formed Sunrise Properties LLC, and when the house next door went up for sale after its owners received their 5th HOA violation in a month, I quietly purchased it. Then another, and another, each time using a different company name, each time keeping my involvement hidden. It wasn't about revenge then, it was about protection. I wanted a safety net for my family and neighbors against Patricia's increasingly erratic leadership. But as I watched her target vulnerable residents, the elderly widow who couldn't afford to repaint her house the exact shade of beige Patricia preferred, the single father working 2 jobs who couldn't mow his lawn on Patricia's schedule, my plan evolved into something more purposeful. Hashtag the showdown. I walked into the community center's meeting room and immediately felt the tension. Every seat was filled with neighbors I'd known for years, sitting shoulder to shoulder, whispering among themselves. Patricia had really outdone herself this time. She'd even hired a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway from different angles, making 3 normal-sized cars look like some kind of illegal parking lot. "Let's begin," Patricia announced, tapping her sparkly pink gavel on the podium. She'd called this emergency meeting on a Tuesday evening, knowing full well that most working families would struggle to attend. But I'd made sure to be there, sitting quietly in the back row, watching her put on her usual show. "As you can see from these professional photographs," she began, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation, "Mr. Reynolds' property has become a used car lot." A few gasps came from her loyal followers in the front row, the same ones whose Christmas decorations stayed up until March without any fines. I glanced around the room, noting how Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, rolled her eyes. She'd been fined last month for having her grandson's car in her driveway while he helped repair her roof. Mr. Chan, the high school science teacher, was furiously taking notes. He'd received a violation notice for parking his car slightly over his own driveway line during the last snowstorm. Patricia clicked to the next slide, showing a zoomed-in photo of my daughter's car. "This vehicle here has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. She failed to mention it was because my daughter was home from college for the weekend. The meeting dragged on as Patricia presented her evidence. Charts showing supposed property value decreases, complaints from anonymous neighbors, probably her friends, and even weather reports suggesting my cars were creating excess snowdrifts on the street. Furthermore, she continued, pulling out a thick binder, I've documented every instance of vehicles entering and leaving Mr. Reynolds' property over the past 3 months. My eyebrows shot up. She'd been tracking my family's movements? Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That's when Sarah Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, stood up. "Patricia, isn't this a bit excessive? They're just regular cars in a regular driveway." Patricia's face reddened as she snapped, "You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair." I watched as Patricia's husband Bob started handing out copies of a new proposed bylaw, one that would limit each household to 2 vehicles and require garage parking only. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. We'll now vote on the new vehicle restrictions and fee increase, Patricia declared, not even bothering to allow discussion. All in favor. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie. Point of order, Madam President. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked at me over her reading glasses. You're not recognized, Mr. Reynolds. Actually, I said, pulling out my own folder. According to HOA Bylaw Section 7.3, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. The room fell silent. I could see Patricia's perfectly manicured nails gripping the podium tighter. Before we vote, I believe it's important to review the HOA's current property ownership structure. I started, walking toward the front of the room, my shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. You see, over the past 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been acquiring homes in this development. Patricia's face started to lose its color as I pulled out a large property map. And as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I thought it might interest everyone to know exactly who owns the majority of this HOA. I paused, making eye contact with each board member. But perhaps we should discuss that after we review these questionable surveillance activities you've been conducting. The room erupted in murmurs. Through my peripheral vision, I could see phones coming out, neighbors recording every moment. Patricia's hand trembled as she reached for her water bottle, knocking over her precious gavel in the process. And that's when Bob rushed to the podium, whispering something in Patricia's ear. Her eyes widened as she finally realized who she'd been messing with all these years. Hashtag the revelation. The meeting room fell silent as I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. Patricia's smug smile started to fade as I pulled out my leather briefcase. Before we vote on these new fees, I said, I have something important to share with everyone. I clicked open my briefcase and removed a thick stack of property deeds, laying them one by one on the table. Each paper represented another piece of my secret plan coming together. The room buzzed with whispers as I arranged them in neat rows. For the past 5 years, I continued, I've watched this HOA board ignore serious maintenance issues while harassing good neighbors over tiny things. I've seen Patricia here write up Mrs. Johnson, who's 82 years old, for having a flower pot that was 1 inch too tall. Meanwhile, her friend Susan's bright purple fence somehow never got a single warning. Patricia's face turned red. That's not true. I enforce all rules fairly. She grabbed her water bottle, but her hand was shaking so much she spilled some on her designer blouse. I pulled up photos on the meeting room's big screen. Here's Patricia measuring my grass at 3 a.m. last Tuesday. The security camera footage was crystal clear. Several people gasped. And here she is ignoring the Thompsons' violations completely right after they hired her son's landscaping company. More whispers filled the room. I could see people starting to nod, remembering their own run-ins with Patricia's selective enforcement. But the most interesting thing I discovered, I said, picking up the stack of deeds, is that through my company, Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this development. I paused as the meaning sank in. That makes me the majority owner of the HOA itself. Patricia jumped up, knocking over her chair. You can't do that. It's not allowed. Her voice had gone squeaky with panic. I smiled calmly. Actually, I can. I've had 3 different law firms review everything. It's completely legal. I pulled out another folder. I also have signed complaints from 32 residents about harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted. Mrs. Johnson stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway fast enough. I was in the hospital with pneumonia. Others joined in, sharing their stories. Patricia tried to restore order, banging her gavel, but nobody was listening to her anymore. I moved to dissolve the current board, I announced. We'll hold new elections with term limits and clear rules about conflict of interest. No more 3 a.m. grass measuring. No more selective enforcement. Bob Chen from 2 doors down raised his hand. I second that motion. Soon hands were going up all around the room. Patricia grabbed her designer purse and started toward the door. This meeting is adjourned, she yelled. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Actually, I said, still calm. According to HOA bylaws section 7.3, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't think you have that anymore. I gestured at the deeds spread across the table. We're just getting started. She froze with her hand on the doorknob, realizing her power was slipping away. 20 years of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist were coming to an end. Now, I said, opening another folder, let's talk about those mysterious pool renovation fees from last summer. The ones where $50,000 disappeared but the pool never got fixed. I have some interesting bank records to share. Patricia slumped against the wall, her face pale. She hadn't noticed yet, but a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot. I'd invited them to cover our community reorganization meeting. The next few hours would change our neighborhood forever. But first, we had years of Patricia's secrets to uncover, and I had every single receipt. My careful planning was finally paying off, and the best part was still to come. ##a new beginning. 3 months after that fateful meeting, Oak Ridge Estates is almost unrecognizable. Not in its appearance, but in its spirit. The property values have actually increased by 12%, contrary to Patricia's dire predictions about what would happen if people were allowed to park 3 cars in their own driveways. We still have an HOA, but now it protects the neighborhood instead of policing it. Every month, we use the fees for things that actually matter: improving the playground, fixing the pool, helping elderly residents maintain their homes. We even started a community garden in the spot where Patricia used to take her yard violation photos. The new board consists of 5 residents from different parts of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, whom Patricia had tried to fine for cooking ethnic food, and Mr. Chun, whose beautiful garden Patricia called too exotic. Term limits ensure no one can build another empire of fear. As for Patricia, she moved away 6 weeks after the meeting. Her moving truck had an ironic parking ticket from her new HOA stuck to the windshield as she drove away. I hear she's already fighting with her new neighbors about their mailbox colors. My daughter parked her car in our driveway that evening, right next to my work truck and my wife's SUV. I put up a small sign we'd all voted on: "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates, where good neighbors make good neighborhoods." Had I simply fought with Patricia over each violation, I would have drained my energy without creating lasting change. By taking the long view, I was able to transform the entire system. My careful records of Patricia's selective enforcement proved invaluable when the time came to make my case. In any dispute, evidence speaks louder than emotions. Patricia wielded the HOA bylaws like a weapon, but she never expected someone to read them more carefully than she had. By connecting with other frustrated neighbors and documenting their experiences, I created a community ready for change when the moment arrived. Our new HOA focuses on enhancing community life rather than restricting it, and everyone benefits as a result. The most important lesson, though, is that sometimes systems need to be changed from within. External complaints rarely transform entrenched power structures. Real change often requires someone to work quietly, patiently, and strategically to create a better alternative. As I file away the last of the court documents, my phone buzzes with a text. It's from Patricia's new neighborhood watch group. They're asking for advice about dealing with their own power-hungry HOA president. I lean back in my chair, thinking about how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing others how to stand up for themselves. If you're facing your own Patricia in your community, remember, document everything. Know the rules, build alliances, and play the long game. Change may not come overnight, but when it does, it will be worth every moment of patience.